Welcome to town. I'm just going to introduce Brian, if that's okay. Thank you so much. If you don't know much about the Opportunity Coalition, it is really worth knowing because it's nonpartisan, it's bipartisan, it's old and young, it's rich and poor, it's talented. No, it's only talented. You have to have some talent. It's like totally incompetent or if you're lazy, we're actually not interested. But Brian founded this because he wanted to bridge the gap between rural and urban. Colorado is a wonderful state, but in many ways we don't communicate well enough with each other. There's folks in the Western Slope and prairies that often wonder what the Front Range of Colorado is up to. And I'm born and raised in the Front Range. I get it. I wonder what we're often up to. And so if you know talent, if you know people of interest, in whether they're in business or academia, education, if they're a writer, if they're a sports star, whatever they are, please bring them into our fold. We've got an extraordinary group of people that really care about Colorado and each other. That's what the Opportunity Coalition is about, is creating opportunities for everybody that we touch. So just a word or two about Brian. Please Google him. Check out his awesome business success. He's doing really well, not just for him, but he's got a really talented group of employees. And Brian, I think this is public. You're hiring, aren't you? Don't you have 6 or 7 major positions open in your company?
10 people now. It's really hard.
Yeah, so if you know somebody of talent, get on his site and say, hey, I want to work with Northstar. Finally, he's an author, and he's a ballot proposer. Should I talk about that? You're going to mention it.
We are.
We are? Okay, so cool. For the last 6 months or so, Brian's thinking about how do we make a real impact in traffic congestion in the Front Range, I-25 corridor, I-70 corridor, where the population is of Colorado. I'm telling you, you just get on it anywhere near rush hour, and there's just too many darn people on the roads, and sitting there causes pollution and just a waste and harming of our environment. And Brian said, why don't we give a tax deduction for folks that drive less than the average miles, 15,000 a year. So if you drive less than 9,000 miles a year, we're going to give you a $10,000 tax deduction. It's not mandatory, it's voluntary. If you drive less than 12,000, or 9,000, we're going to give you 10,000. If you drive less than 12,000, we'll give you a $5,000 deduction. So what it does is it voluntarily makes everyone aware of how we increase or decrease our air pollution and how we increase the mobility of people trying to get to work or their pleasure. It's a really good idea. He and I are the proposals of that. We're going to be going to the Secretary of State in just a week from now. We ask you to get engaged because we're going to go around and collect a bunch of signatures from around the state. Can you tell what a mover and shaker Brian is? Brian, the show is yours.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. John is on the payroll. It should be. I'll tell you what. Very kind of you, John. Thank you. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. You could be somewhere else, but you decided to be with us, and for that we're grateful. We have some seats here for those that are standing in the back if you want to. We were just downstairs, and already it was an amazing discussion, and I'm really excited about opening that up to all of us here on the floor. I want to acknowledge Tim Jackson and the Colorado Auto Dealers Association for hosting us in their beautiful building and being so kind in doing that. Let's give him a round of applause. I also want to acknowledge Will Feldman, CEO of Garlic Media, and his colleague Ryan for sponsoring this event's video production. Let's give them a round of applause. I want to thank Monique Olson, who works with Northstar, and she helps with the food and the photography and all the other amazing things. If you want good pictures, she's the one to go to. Let's give her a round of applause. As you know, at the Opportunity Coalition, or if you don't know, we really believe in trying to promote connections, and whether that be personal connections and friendships, whether that be nonprofit connections, or whether it be business connections. And so with that, we have a business card draw. If you want to bring that up, Christina.
I apologize.
That's a pretty fancy cup you got
container.
there. I'll tell you. So in 30 seconds or less, we'd like you to come up and tell us who you are. We ask that you be respectful and keep it at 30 seconds because we want to make sure we can get on with the program. And I also have a copy of my latest book that I'll give to that individual. Why don't you draw? There we go. Who is it? Oh. Well, first of all,
They're going to have to kill me.
I should hold that up for everybody to see.
Because we all do this.
This is the secret plan. I don't know what the plan says, but that is the secret plan. So So with that, John, you want to stand up and tell us who you are?
Well, thank you. And, I'm John Whitcomb, and I'm with HyperNet. And we are a group that came out of Elon Musk and the Hyperloop Challenge, trying to redefine what our future transportation would be. And we're focused on creating very straight, high-speed guideways for Hyperloops and every other type of vehicle. We're working our way back from in the future to the current day. I think we'll meet in about 4 or 5 years.
That's great. Round of applause. Okay, I want to acknowledge our amazing board members. Several of them are here this evening. If I miss you, please raise your hand and I'll make sure to call out your name. First, we have Kyle Henderson, Chief of Staff at Northstar. Kyle, give him a round of applause. We have Scott Bemis, Director of Business and Community Partnership at EKSNH, which is now Plant Moran. We have Luke Wyckoff, CEO of Social Media Energy, which I think we need to change eventually, but give a good round of applause. We have Rocio Perez, President and CEO of Eventiva Consulting. John Brackney, who was with us but I think had to run. He's Director of Strategic Community and Webolutions. We have Scott Yenzer, Senior Vice President of Black Eagle Energy Services. Scott. We have Mr. Brian Hart, owner of Frame to Art, my favorite framing store. And Christina Whalen, who just came up, who's a retired mortgage executive. Christina. Also, Abel Medrano, co-owner of High Rock Real Estate. Abel? Anyone? Okay, wanted to make sure. Okay, so let's dive in. Why did we found the Opportunity Coalition for those that are new? Really for some simple reasons. To promote free markets, business, and entrepreneurship, and to build bridges of connection among diverse groups of people. And really just to learn from others. I am so excited about this panel here. This is a panel that normally doesn't get together, and I'm just excited that they are here together. They may have differing views, and you know what? That's okay. We can be civil and we can have differing views, and I'd like to see a lot more of that tonight. Anybody up for that?
Yeah. Here.
It's a whole other conversation. Beers will serve later, we can talk about it. But seriously, these people are all leaders in their field, and I'm just so grateful that they're here with us tonight. Transportation. With Colorado's population growing by 60 to 70,000 people every year, how does the state's infrastructure hold up? As drive times to and from work continue to increase, where are we able to go from here? Let me share some stats with you that I found very interesting. Drivers in Denver's metro area spend on average 61 hours each year in traffic delays. I know that maybe on your morning commute it felt like 61 hours this morning, but on average 61 hours in the traffic delays. The 20th highest amount in America. This causes excess fuel per driver of 25 gallons, congestion cost per driver of about $1,000 a year. In 2019, CDOT reported that there were 593 fatalities due to accidents involving a motor vehicle. The summer months ranked the highest, with 76 deaths in August alone. Car insurance comparison ranked Colorado as the 6th state with the worst drivers. Come on, we're not the worst drivers. Pretty good, are we? We're still know about this. We're not the worst, but due to failure to obey traffic and safety laws, I know no one in this room does that. I know we have great drivers in here. With speeding being its second worst ranking factor for motorists in the state. In 2019, Department of Revenue issued a total of about 1.1 million licenses, with 88,000 of those licenses to minors. My 16-year-old son was one of those. I just keep an eye out for him on the road. Okay.
What's he driving?
His big truck. Really big truck. The Denver Regional Council of Governments issued a report last year analyzing driving data from 2018. The study found that on an average day in 2018, vehicles traveled 84.3 million miles, which is a 15% increase over the last 5 years. If that trend continues, Dr. Coggs suggests that by 2040, vehicle miles traveled on freeways and other major roads could grow by more than 40%. The Downtown Denver Partnership released a study in March of 2019 revealing that 40% of Denver commuters choosing public transit. About 35% of commuters chose to drive alone. 9% ride a bicycle to work. 15% are walking, carpooling, and using other methods of transportation. So again, just some stats to share as we go into this conversation. Let me read a little bit about each one of our panelists, and then we're going to open it up, let them talk a little bit about themselves, and then I'll be asking them different questions. And at the end, we're going to open it up for Q&A with all of you. And I will make sure you'll promptly out of here at 7 o'clock because I have to leave Denver by 7:45 tonight, so we're going to make sure we're on time. So first, not in particular order, but we'll work this way and work our way over. Mr. Doug Tisdale, he's chairman of the board of RTD. Doug Tisdale was elected to represent District H, Cherry Hills Village, Greenwood Village, Centennial, Littleton, Columbine Valley, and Highlands Ranch in November of 2016. Doug was elected chairman of the RTD board in January 2018 and re-elected as the chair in January 2019. Committed to communicate, collaborate, and cooperate. They're dedicated to collaborative business growth on a regional, national, and international level. Doug is the Executive Vice President of the South Metro Denver Chamber of Commerce, where he focuses on creating an environment of economic development and prosperity throughout the region. Doug recently served as mayor of Cherry Hills Village and was an officer of the Denver Regional Council of Governments, where he worked on transportation issues for almost 12 years. The Denver Metro Mayor's Caucus, the Colorado Municipal League, and the National League of Cities. In addition to being the chairman of the Colorado State Board of Registered Psychotherapists, which I didn't know that about you until I read that bio. We should talk later. At the Colorado Department of, you're listening, I'm sure you are taking notes. At the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies for 8 years, he is also a member of the Board of Governors at the Denver Zoo and the Board of Trustees at the Lone Tree Cultural Arts Foundation. Let's give him a round of applause. Next, we have Shoshana Lew. Shoshana Lew was appointed as the Executive Director for the Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT, in December of 2018. She is charged with leading the department in planning for and addressing Colorado's transportation needs and overseeing 3,000 employees statewide and an annual budget this year of approximately $2 billion. How many people do you know are overseeing an annual budget of approximately $2 billion? She's one of them. Prior to coming to Colorado, she served as the Chief Operating Officer for the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. Also, she was the Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Secretary for Budget and Programs for the U.S. Department of Transportation, as well as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy for the U.S. DOT program. Lew has also worked in other areas of the federal government, including the U.S. Department of the Interior and the Office of Management and Budget and Domestic Policy Council within the White House. Prior to her federal service, she worked at the Brookings Institution. She is a graduate of Harvard College with a bachelor's degree in history. She is, okay, we got it. Which part of that, the degree or the college? Okay, you can do both, okay. Lew also has a master's degree in history from Northwestern University. Let's give her. And last but not least, we have Mr. Tim Jackson, who's the CEO of the Colorado Auto Dealers Association. He serves as the president and CEO of the association, CADA, the trade association for 400 new car, truck, RV, and motorcycle dealers across the state. As the Chief Staff Officer of CADA, Tim advocates for issues of importance to franchised new car dealers, business, and the public's freedom to drive and right to buy their vehicle of choice. CADA provides training and education, legislative and regulatory advocacy, member services, and legal compliance support for Colorado's new car dealers. For the prior 7 years, Tim served as the state director for the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, small business advocacy organization with 600,000 members nationally. Tim is a certified association executive and a certified meeting professional and a frequent speaker on business and auto industry issues. Let's give him a round of applause. So with that, we're going to start and have each panelist tell us a little bit about themselves, if they would like, and their role. You said hold it down for 30 seconds? Is it working? No? Kyle?
Hold down. 30 seconds, try a 3 to 4 seconds.
Yeah,
30 seconds. Hold it down.
Okay.
Green for a minute.
You're live.
I'll leave it
It'll
on.
turn green once it's.
I'm gonna need you to come up here.
We have the technology.
Oh, there it is, I got green.
You got
Am I
it?
good? Can you hear it?
Nate will know much better than I.
Okay, whoa, okay, you're a speaker. So with that, we'll start with you.
Now it's live.
Thanks very much. Good evening, all. Well, we can do better than that. Good evening, all. That's great. That's the energy that we want to see, because you've got a good panel here, and you're going to be interested in what everyone has to say. Let me take just a minute to tell you a little bit about RTD, because some people don't really know exactly what it is that we do. The mission of RTD is to provide safe, clean, reliable, courteous, accessible, cost-effective transportation services throughout the region. Now that's a big job because the region is 2,400 square miles. That's the size of the state of Delaware. And there are 3+ million people who live within those 2,400 square miles. That's the size of the state of Utah. We're overseen by 15 elected directors. And those are 15 districts that are population equalized throughout that 2,400 square miles. And one thing that you may not know, we actually are the largest political jurisdiction in the state of Colorado outside of the state of Colorado itself. It was mentioned that I am chairman. I'm actually now the immediate past chair. I was chair for 2 years, and I said it's not a good thing for me to run for a third term. I think we need some variety, some other energy there, so I did not run for re-election a couple of weeks ago, and so we have a new chair, Angie Rivera-Malpiedi. But I am delighted to have had the opportunity to serve as chair for 2 years. I am in the final year of my first term. I am eligible for re-election. The election will be in the general election in November this year. I'll be contacting you later on that. I was intrigued by one thing, and I thought that we need to make sure that we get out of here at 7 o'clock so Brian can catch his plane or whatever. And the topic tonight is issues and solutions for traffic congestion. And I thought we could make this really simple. The issue is that we have a lot of people now who've created a lot of congestion. And the solution is to take the ride, either light rail or the bus. And that's it. So thank you very much. Have a great evening, and glad you all could be with us.
Good evening, I'm Shoshana Lew. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Transportation. We principally run the statewide road network, which is the foundation upon which many modes of transportation travel. We span both the metropolitan areas and the rural ones, so with respect to the comment that was made at the introduction about how those interface, we are at a point where all that comes together and we think about how to balance a statewide system. I'll talk for a moment up at the top about a process that we went through over the past year to kind of talk to people across the state of Colorado about what we need from the system. And this was a process of immediate relevance because it was that which we used to dedicate the resources that we have thanks to our legislature giving us some additional money to spend over the next couple of years. And it really hit on 4 themes, which I think are worth going through because it gives us a bit of a foundation to discuss here. The thing that we heard from virtually everybody is that the kind of safety and basic integrity of the system is a concern to people, whether they're in the most rural counties or Metro Denver. A pothole is a pothole wherever you hit it. And I think something that we found sort of deeply encouraging about this process is just how much appreciation there is for the need to take care of the basics. And that, I think, gives us top cover to do some boring but important things. With that came a kind of realization that the rural roads across the state, which are vast and used by both the people who live in Metro Denver and the people who live in rural communities, by folks traveling for leisure or recreation, by freight, or by residents, have not always been at the focus of people's attention. And one of the things that we're doing is making the largest investment in rural transportation in modern Colorado history. The other pieces, probably a surprise to nobody here, are that the congestion issues, up and down the Front Range in particular, are reaching a breaking point. And that resources will always be limited, so that there's a need to sort of target towards the places where we can get the most bang for our buck, and it will always be a limited buck. Places like I-25, the choke points on I-70, and really places where we can optimize the limited dollars that we have to mitigate that to the extent possible. The last point that really came out of our process was an appreciation for the safety needs that come with living in growing cities. And there has been a tragic growth in pedestrian fatalities nationwide in the past few years. I think it actually dipped down a little bit this year, which is good news. But it's a phenomenon where the more people are in cities, the more vulnerable travelers, people in cars are all kind of needing to manage limited space, and thinking about how we deal with that, be it through kind of building solutions, technology, or otherwise. And before I turn it to Tim, I would just object to one point in the introduction, that we don't talk to each other that often. You wouldn't do this job if you didn't like talking about cars, and I really appreciate the partnership that we have. And everything from talking about how we move to electric vehicles to thinking about auto shows.
Great. Thank you, Shoshana. I'm going to start my presentation with a little bit of a gift. Because of Amendment 41, we can't give a gift to Shoshana, but I can give a gift to her agency. And we all want better safety, so this is a very safe bicycle helmet. She has seen it before. She didn't know she was going to get one of these, or the department. She might be able to check it out and use it, but you can check it out here. This is a very special helmet because not only does it have front and back lights, and you can adjust the lights to any image you want, but it also has turn signals. So we want Shoshana, when she's checking this out, to be very safe, especially with that Harvard degree. We want to protect that. That's the back lights. And she will have a lot of fun with that helmet. I've got one, and I have a lot of fun with mine. So
we'll look into the Amendment 41 policies later, but safety first.
We're going to talk about a lot of problems like traffic congestion, air quality, public safety, and the like. But let's, before we tell about how bad it is, let's talk about how good it is. And one of the things that is good is vehicle emissions. There's two types of vehicle emissions. One's the carbon emissions, that's the climate change emissions. The other are the particle emissions. Who in the room, I'm old enough to remember, in Denver, 15, 20 years ago, you could look west toward the mountains on any June, July, or August day, and you couldn't see the mountains. Now there's not many June, July, or August days you can't look west and see the mountains. Am I right? You can testify to that. Okay, vehicle emissions which are just a component of the ozone. Vehicle emissions continue to reduce. How much have they reduced? New cars today, everything we sell today, all the way up to Freightliner, Mack, and over the road, Peterbilt and Kenworth trucks. New car vehicle emissions are virtually 99% cleaner than anything we had available for sale in our showrooms just 20, 25, or 30 years ago. So the best way to improve vehicle emissions is not necessarily, and we can't necessarily lower our vehicle miles traveled so much, but we can drive newer, cleaner cars. And so I want to tell you about how much vehicle emissions have been reduced. On the climate change emissions, we get better with better fuel economy. And whether, besides going to totally emission-free cars, that's the battery electric or EV cars, new vehicles today, just because of the fuel economy, have improved 28% over the last 10 years on the average fuel economy, and continue to get better and better every year. So on climate change emissions, we're getting better too. Let's talk about safety for a bit. And of course, this denotes not every bicyclist I see on the bike trail is wearing a helmet. But I can tell you that I've been in just in the time I've ridden cycles, and I've put on 3,000 to 5,000 miles on bicycles every year. And I've had 3 pretty bad accidents. In all 3 of them, I've been pretty much injury-free as it relates to my head because of the helmet. And in 2 of the 3, the helmet was ruined because I hit so hard. Now, if you can imagine if I broke a helmet by hitting that hard, how bad I would have been if I hadn't had the helmet on. So if you're riding a bike, definitely wear a helmet. Can I get an amen on that?
Amen.
Okay. Now,
Scooter too. You should wear a helmet on a scooter too.
let's talk about how we want to reduce. Somebody's brought up traffic fatalities. I think it was in Brian Watson's intro. Traffic fatalities and how many there are. And however many there are too many. Can we all agree with that? Yes. But traffic fatalities as it relates to the number of vehicle miles traveled are dramatically down. The high water mark on traffic fatalities in the U.S. was in 1972, and it was roughly 52,000 nationally. That number declined to about 32,000 by about 5 years ago. It's ticked back up, probably because of distracted driving. But the vehicle miles traveled over that time period has literally increased about 2.5 times. So 200, in round numbers, 250%. Let me get a little audience participation. We're going to just have, if you don't have an educated answer on that, you could have an educated guess. How many vehicle miles traveled in our cars, not bikes, but in our cars, do Americans commute before we get to the first traffic fatality in America today? So on average, for every traffic fatality, how many VMTs have been traveled by American drivers? And the first answer is going to be low, I would guess. So first answer? Guess? First guess? How many vehicle miles traveled? 400,000 was mentioned. 1 million was mentioned. I told you the first answer, that's the first two answers, way low.
10 million?
More?
2.5 million. 40.
More? 40 million? More? It's roughly 100 million vehicle miles traveled before there's a first traffic fatality. Why are vehicles so safe? Obviously because of the way they're constructed and the way we're harnessed in, because of seat belts and airbags. Save literally hundreds of thousands of lives. And that's why that we've been able to go from 52,000 to roughly 38,000 now. But keep in mind that the VMTs have almost tripled in that time. So vehicles are cleaner and on vehicle emissions, much better, much lower. And now we're moving to EVs. By the way, we all want to get more EVs on the road. Shoshana is under a charge by the governor. The governor's got an executive order that calls for 940,000 EVs. That was signed, that was his first executive order in January of this year. That's just in Colorado, not nationally, in Colorado. Okay? How are we doing on that? Our dealers have been selling EVs since we first got the Volts and the Nissan Leafs in our showrooms about 10 years ago. So let's say we've been selling them for 10 years, and at the end of 2018, we had about 23,000 on the road. 23,000. That means we've got the next 10 years to go from 23,000 to 940,000. How many vehicles new cars do you think we sell in a good year? A little audience participation. It's all up on our website. Roughly in a good year, about 200,000. So if to get to 940,000 in the next 10 years, we've roughly got to make every other car we sell has to be an EV. And that's coming up from, at the end of 2018, 2.7% of the overall fleet were battery electric or plug-in hybrids, to 50%. In a bad year, we've had some bad years, nobody wants a bad year, but in a bad year it's 100,000, so that means every vehicle we sell in a bad year has to be an EV. So we've got a lot of selling to do. So I'm going to count on Shoshana Lew and her department. By the way, I love that $2 billion budget. $2 billion budget. We can just buy a lot of cars for that.
The cars need asphalt.
Yeah, the cars need asphalt. So $2 billion budget, and I'll pass the mic and we'll get to some Q&A. We do have some more things to talk about.
I love your passion, always. I love it. Okay, first question. Is that going to stop blinking, by the way? That's not the first question, but I really like it. I hope you can use it, by the way. Number one, in your opinion, how would you compare Colorado's transportation system with other states? Doug, do you want to start with you, or Shoshana, you want to take that?
I'm happy to start that one because I think on the whole, we have a lot of really great things about our transportation system. We hear a lot of negative comments about it, and it's appropriate to hear those negative comments because it keeps you honest, it keeps you on task, and it keeps you focused on trying to improve. But let's not forget that we do have a very good transportation system. And I will include the RTD in that. The RTD is one of the largest transit systems in the country. And when I was in Rome last year and looking at their map for their light rail system, I was intrigued to see that basically it modeled ours, and it has essentially the same lines in terms of directions and going into the ancient city and so forth. So it's really striking that we have a great system. And then I look at our University of Colorado A line, goes from Denver Union Station out to Denver International Airport, and I'm telling you that we have literally one of the best trains to the plane in the world. So I think when you look at the broad sense of transportation, not just the road system, which is terribly important because our rubber tire service has to use that road system, when you look at that, you say, we've actually got a pretty good system. So I think it ranks favorably.
I think we have a very sort of diverse and multifaceted system that kind of reflects the place that Colorado is. I mentioned the kind of disparity between the metropolitan road system and that in rural areas, and we have some of the most kind of intricate mountain road terrain in the country, and that comes with great strengths, but it also comes with its own set of challenges. And one of the things that falls to us a great deal is that the way that you take care of a system like that is very different than taking care of a system in a place with a more temperate climate. Everything from avalanche mitigation to the kinds of repair that you have to do when chains run roughshod on I-70 every winter because we tell the trucks that they have to, to the challenges that come with not being able to build out places where the capacity is sort of warranted. I mean, there's parts of I-70 where folks can be as frustrated as they want with the congestion, but there's physically no place to go, so you have to manage a system that's sort of confined by geological wonders that make it a beautiful place, but also confine how and where you grow it. In the metropolitan areas, we have a sort of unique and good problem of being a place that people want to move to. And that means that the road system, as you've heard from many others here, is not equipped for the population that we have today because it wasn't built for the population that we have today. And sort of how we manage those challenges that are very different in different places, but also sort of keep Colorado the place that it is, and don't become a Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, right? We don't want to be any of those places. But also sort of addressing the congestion kind of presents an interesting set of challenges.
Great. Well, I am here to talk about cars, but I would agree with the comment on the RTD and the plane to train. I love the plane to train or train to plane, I guess, unless you're flying in. But and I use it on a fairly regular basis. I think our transportation system, I think it has the capacity, it has the ability to be good, but it doesn't have the capacity right now to be good. And I think as a state, we do need to look at new ways to fund the transportation system. And as Doug said in an earlier conversation, the voters have struck down 2 attempts to increase funding for highways. I can tell you, and we don't have a policy position on this as an association, but I know I have some member dealers in our organization who would say, look, if we would have increased the gasoline tax by 5 cents a gallon over the next 10 years, and with the amount of with the difference in the cost of fuel having gone down, we would have never felt it, and we would literally have money running over but that hasn't been voted down because that proposition hasn't been put before the voters. And I think that's something that we can all agree needs to be done. We need to have more funding. Shoshana and her agency is widening I-25, and I would say finally going to northern Colorado, and now developing expanding the gap between Castle Rock and Monument going south. And for those of us who have been around Colorado long enough to know that it should only take an hour to get to Fort Collins, and it should only take an hour to get to Colorado Springs. Now when we go to Fort Collins or when we go to Colorado Springs, we usually have to budget about 2 hours just because the gap isn't done and the expansion going north isn't done. So I think we've got the foundations for a really good system, but our funding and our development of that and expansion with the population growth hasn't kept up. And I think to me, instead of adding a lane in the gap or adding a lane going north, we should have just gone ahead and added 2 lanes. And I think we'd have a better transportation system if we had.
That's good. What immediate improvements do you think are necessary to reduce traffic congestion?
Start with that.
Thank you. Happy to take it again as the start, and I'll tell you, okay, ride the train, ride the bus. That will reduce traffic congestion. And I know that the concern is often stated. Number one, we love cars. That's why we have over 80 park and rides on our system through the RTD. And we can park tens of thousands of cars in those park and rides. So drive to a park and ride and then take the bus or the train to get where you need to be. And you say, okay, but then it gets me close to where I want to go, but it doesn't get me there. And the answer is we have a partnership with Lyft and Uber. You pull out your phone now and you pull up your Uber app and you book your trip on your Uber to get to the train station. It will book your ride and it will buy you your ticket on the train. So you'll have a ticket to ride, and that's on your Uber app that you have right now. Lyft gives you that information. They will soon give you the opportunity to buy that ticket as well. We were the very first city in the world that Uber did that with. They're going to start with London in April. We started doing this last January with Uber. So we were absolutely ahead of the game on that. So again, using a little public transportation would be beneficial to all of us. And I always tell people who live, I live in Cherry Hills Village, I used to be the mayor there, and there are people say, oh, well, we would never take the train or the bus. And I say, yes, but encourage other people to do that, because then the freeway's open for you.
It's a good segue. I think, I would agree with what Doug said, that, having a lot of options to get around and having people use all of the options, and it doesn't have to be the same people using the same options every day. We talked about this a bit downstairs, that, we aren't drivers or transit riders or pedestrians. We're like people who need to get places, and we'll make different choices based on where we're going, and to sort of think about what the most efficient option is for the trip you're trying to take at that moment, and then optimize for that in a way which makes the roads efficient and usable for the people who need to be using them then, I think is an excellent strategy. In terms of adding capacity, saying quick fix to add capacity is a bit of an oxymoron, because as anyone who's driven the Gap noticed, it's not a fast process to add lane mileage, and nor is it something that we can do overnight. And I think for the reasons that it is so hard to do, we have to be careful about how we do it and where we do it, and making sure that we optimize in that too for the places where it will be the most effective. I think the managed lane network that we're building out at CDOT in partnership with the High Performance Transportation Enterprise is another excellent strategy that we've seen for sort of managing the effects of congestion. US 36 was the first corridor that sort of truly opened in earnest in that respect, has one of the best bus systems in the state. Because it's truly a multimodal corridor. But part of what that does is it allows for an efficient and fast option when you need it most. And again, it doesn't mean that everyone chooses that paved lane all the time, but if the value of time leans in favor of making that choice, it's there.
Let me just footnote.
Speaking of the US 36 corridor, it is the only freeway portion segment in the metropolitan area that has gone down in congestion time, and that's because of the bus rapid transit. That's because of the Flatiron Flyer. So you actually can improve freeways if you will have BRT as part of your solution.
Great, and it is great improvement, because driving your car up there is so much better now.
I love driving my car there.
Yeah. No, we have a lot of people think, say, hey, I want to get more light rail out there so more people will ride it, so we have more room on our roads to drive our cars. So it is a good concept. I'm glad we're not the only ones preaching it. You're preaching it too. The one thing I want to cover here before time runs out is the adage of do no harm. Okay, in the city of Denver, and I've already told you I'm an avid cyclist, so what we're about to talk about here is not against cycling, but there's places that cycling work and cycle lanes should be, and other places that are best kept for car lanes. One of them is South Broadway. Okay, South Broadway in the city of Denver, the city of Denver, this is not Shoshana's project, but the city of Denver, has taken away out of 5 traffic lanes, let's call them really important traffic lanes in rush hour traffic, from the Capitol to I-25. They've now reduced those to 3. So now there's a bus rapid transit lane that's 24/7, 365 on the right, and now they've added a bicycle-only lane, two-way bicycle traffic on the left lane. So those are coming out of the car lanes. One thing I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed it too, and I'm saying this as a motorist and a cyclist, there's not many cyclists using the cycle lanes, right? And so we actually staked it out. We did a stakeout. Nate was a part of that. We staked it out from 4 to 6 p.m. rush hour traffic, Friday afternoon. Happened to be the last Friday before daylight savings time because we wanted to be able to count the commuters. And in that, this will be of interest to you. It's not been published, so you're getting to hear it before it's published in major media. And that is that over 6,000 of the commuters chose to be in cars. Now some of them were Ubers and Lyfts. Some of them were single occupancy. Some of them had 3, 4, 5 people in the same car. So that's not bad either, right? And there were about, to RTD's credit, there were 756, I believe. I can get you the exact number on this. And then I'll get you the percentages here in a minute. There were literally 11, compared to 6,000 in cars, 11 on bicycles. Now the really sad part on the cycles is that after we've dedicated a lane for cyclists on South Broadway, they're not even using it because only 5 of the 11 were actually in the bicycle lanes. Where were they then? Well, 5 of the 11, that gets us up to 10. Another 5 were taking their cycle lane out of Doug's bus lane. So they were going down the right lane in the bus lane. Now there's still 1 left if you're keeping up with the count here. I said there were 11, 5 that were in the cycle lanes, 5 were in the bus lanes. 1 brave soul with no helmet, no lights, no nothing, he took his cycle lane right out of the middle lane of the traffic. And I mean, he was really on a death wish. But nothing against cycle lanes, but we wouldn't recommend you put cars on the Cherry Creek Trail or the Platte River Trail, and we recommend you don't put bicycles on South Broadway. It's just like not putting pedestrians on I-25 or I-70. It's just not working out very well, and it doesn't make much sense. Let's do it by percentages. 89% of that commuter rush hour traffic chose to be in mostly privately owned motor vehicles down the middle 3 lanes. About 11% were in Doug's RTDs and buses, bus rapid transit, and literally 0.2% made the bicycle lanes. Now, I think, what's the alternative to that? And being pro-cyclist as I am, it makes a lot more sense for the city of Denver to put a bicycle lane, make Sherman Street local traffic only, residents only, and bicycles. It's 2 blocks off Broadway, it's 1 block off Lincoln, and I think the cyclists would use it more. By the way, Aspen gets it. You go through Aspen, pretty liberal Tony community, and Glitter Gulch as some call it. They get it. They've taken a 1 block off of Highway 82. They don't take the bicycle lanes out of 82. 1 block off 82, it's local traffic and bicycles only. Frisco gets it. They've done the same thing. You've seen that, Brian. You know it, up in Frisco and Breckenridge. But Denver chooses to take the bicycle lanes out of the rush hour traffic and out of the car lanes. Now they're doing it also now on 15th, and they're doing it on 17th on buses. 18th, 19th, and 20th will get bus and cycle lanes. Now, if they were using those lanes proportionate to the commuter traffic in cars, it makes sense, but they're really not. And so by doing them, by the way, we don't have yet pogo stick lanes, but there's still time. So pogo sticks, I mean, it might be an alternative transportation. They deserve a lane. You know, maybe some say that the autonomous cars will need a lane. By the way, and we haven't started talking about it, I know you're going to get to autonomy if you get to bike that. So we can get to autonomy, and nothing wrong with autonomy, but autonomous cars, The last thing they need is a lane of their own because they will be smart enough to run with the traffic.
So I have to apologize to all of you. I did not get the executive director of the Pogo Stick Association here tonight. Next time, I'll work on it. Okay, CDOT reported that there were about 593 traffic fatalities last year. What can be done to make Colorado's roads safer? Whoever wants to take that question.
Given the statistics, I'll start. It is a tough problem to solve, and it's probably the thing that weighs heaviest on us, because every one of those is not just a statistic. It's somebody with a life and a family and a community, and the ripple effects are just you get a text message every time one happens, and it makes you shiver. It's the kind of problem where we believe that we have to take an all of the above approach to trying to solve it, and that's looking at what we can do within the contours of the infrastructure itself, looking at what we can do to communicate with people about how to use that infrastructure safely, because there are significant number of human factors associated with most accidents, and then to kind of build a safety culture both within our organization and with the sort of community of practice, so that we can model safety, whether it's driving safely around our snowplows or the way that we manage a work zone, to kind of communicate that people have to be aware of each other and aware of safety. On the infrastructure side, one of the things that we've done is to try and look at what are the sort of low-hanging fruit in terms of relatively simple to execute things that can make a big difference in terms of the way that people use the roadway. And one of the things that we've done this past year is to focus on lane striping. I mentioned this downstairs. It's something where it doesn't require a whole lot of advanced planning, because it's not as complicated as building an interchange or a segment of highway. But if you're driving on a dark mountain road, whether you are nearsighted like me or can see perfectly, it's actually the thing that is most sort of visible to you, in the snow or just at night. So what we've moved to is a policy of putting 6-inch stripes as opposed to 4-inch stripes, and brighter, just better illuminated striping on the roads. And when you drive on those roads, you can see the difference between the ones where we've striped and the ones where we haven't. And it's part of our thinking that we need to just be very practical about how we approach what keeps people safe. Things like signage can be used very, very well, or can actually be confusing in the worst case scenario. So thinking about how we kind of communicate with the public, whether that's in how to sort of show them how to use the infrastructure or talk to them about how to use the infrastructure, is immensely important. And that kind of bleeds into the second issue, which is tackling human factors. Something that we've done since I've been at CDOT is trying to think about everything from our press releases to signage as having a conversation with the public about how to drive. And some of that is, you may have noticed that we've been putting out driving tips before snowstorms in order to just sort of reinforce over and over and over again what you have to do to have snow tires, chain up, when it's frankly not safe to be driving if you can avoid it. And what we found is that in a year where we had an unusual number of kind of intense weather incidents, we actually saw fatalities go down measurably this past year. So it was a year when it was a hard one to manage, and we think that the human factors piece had something to do with that. And just one kind of statistic that I'll point to is the 3-day storm that we had sort of early, right around Thanksgiving. The closures that we had to implement on I-70 were shorter. We did not have to close the I-25 gap, and in previous storms that had been of shorter duration, all of those things were worse. And the metric that we can point to of what we did is that we just talked to people a heck of a lot about what to do and what not to do. We also had our plows deployed in full force, and went into overtime in terms of how we applied product to the roads. But just being sort of conversant with people about how to use the road safely, we found makes a big difference. And then finally, I just point to that issue of safety culture, which is that you can't talk about it enough. And to the point where we sometimes have to say it in ways that sound hokey. Reminding people to have a safe drive, talking about using seatbelts. Most people who die on the road, we find we're not wearing seatbelts, and it's such a simple intervention. Vehicle technology, mandates it for a reason, and that it saves lives. And the fact is that it's a choice whether people utilize that feature when they get into the car. And the more that we can do to just remind people and each other over and over and over again about the simple things that we have to do to protect ourselves and each other in vehicles can't be underestimated.
one thing that everybody, I think, knows, but people don't think it really applies to them. You know, it's not me, but distracted driving and distracted walking. I cannot tell you the number of people I see just crossing the street, staring down. And that is an accident literally waiting to happen. So our operators, light rail, commuter rail, and buses are prohibited from having their devices on their person when they're operating the vehicles, because we don't want that temptation. But you've got pedestrians who are constantly doing that. One part of the statistic that is very hard to calculate for, I think, motor vehicle crashes and fatalities is something that we actually take into account at the RTD. You periodically will hear about someone who is killed on the train line. And you'll say, oh, that's terrible. They must be doing something wrong. We cannot control suicides. And we have suicide by train that happens periodically. The majority of our fatalities on the train lines are suicide by train. And that's just something that we can't control. There's only so much you can do. So recognize that that's a reality. And I was at an American Public Transportation Association conference earlier last year when we had 2 fatalities at the same station over a weekend. And people were talking about it. And of course it was a copycat situation in that case. And there was a fellow from DART, from Dallas area Rapid Transit, and he was giving me some commiseration, and he said, you know, I read about your story. It's too bad y'all got all that press. You know, whenever we have someone die, we get all kinds of press. They talk about it all day, and there's stories about it. You know, if you're in New York, that happens every day. You never see anything in the paper. And that's true. So bear in mind that's one small factor that is associated with this too. But I want to leave you with the distracted driving and distracted walking as my own lesson on that.
Yeah, well, I can't match his Texas accent, so I'm not even going to try. Yeah, I'm going to pass the mic back to Brian. I've got some more, but we'll save it for the
Okay,
appropriate area.
so I have one more group question, and then we're going to have 3 specific questions for each of you. Do you think that ride sharing, such as Uber and Lyft, is an issue or a solution to Colorado's traffic congestion? The reason why I share this one, I love to talk to taxi cab drivers. I think you can learn a lot from a taxi cab driver, specifically a New York taxi cab driver. They have something they want to tell you about everything. And not too long ago, I was with one, and he was sharing with me that there are about 5,000 yellow taxis in Manhattan right now. The high point was that there was 25,000 on the roads in New York and Manhattan, and now there's 5. The rest of them are all out in parking lots out in Long Island. The reason is there's now 80,000 Uber, Lyft, ride-sharing drivers that can flip their switch on at any time. So in actuality, there could be more congestion on the road for something that's a ride-sharing type of a solution. So what are your thoughts in terms of, do you think ride-sharing, such as Uber and Lyft, is an issue or solution to Colorado's traffic congestion? And let me finish by saying that is an unofficial statistic by said taxi cab driver. I was just sharing what he said. So don't hold me to that and get me upset. So with that.
I already mentioned the Uber and Lyft partnerships with RTD. So obviously we view it as part of the solution. We view it as something that can be utilized to answer what we call the first mile, last mile problem. How do I get to the train? How do I get from the train? How do I get to the bus? How do I get from the bus? Uber and Lyft provide that, and we think that's great. And we think that's a very useful mechanic for addressing those issues. So we definitely are in partnership with them and view them as potentially a part of the solution.
I think it's an issue that has only emerged right in the past decade or so, and there's potential for it to go either way, and there's a role for how we think about policy in making that decision. And I'll point to Tim's industry for a moment. We think a lot about how to apply policy to what goes in a car, right? There are regulations that mandate fuel economy. There are regulations that put in place airbags, seatbelts, rear view cameras. So we think a lot about the role of policy making in how the car is made and kind of optimizing for the possibility that it can be used in different ways. There's also, in some ways, going to have to be a policy role in thinking about how we integrate these new and changing technologies into our roadways. In some places, they've started to think about revenue structures around Ubers, Lyfts, and other forms of shared transportation. But thinking about whether there are incentives for having multiple riders in a vehicle instead of one. We at CDOT in the past year, pursuant to a direction from the legislature, did a study of what a kind of potential fee structure around these types of transportation network companies and other forms of shared transportation could look like. And one of the things that it asked us to model was, are there ways through policy that you can incentivize the use of these vehicles to carry multiple passengers rather than one at a time? Because the footprint, both for emissions purposes and for what it does to our roads, is very different if each one is carrying one passenger versus each one carrying 2, 3, or 4. And I think there are ways that we can make this be a part of the solution, whether it's through optimizing for multiple passenger use or through connecting it to transit, so that instead of displacing a bus, it's getting people to the bus. But at the end of the day, each one is still a vehicle on the road, so we have to sort of treat it that way.
Great. Well, let's first talk about Uber and Lyft. I'm a pretty frequent user. I mentioned that earlier. If you use these services, you get a report at the end of the year. At the end of 2019, I had 174 Lyft rides. At the end of 2018, I had 171 Lyft rides. So I'm a pretty avid user. But they're not right now, so far. If you follow their stock and you follow their earnings reports, they're losing literally billions upon billions of dollars. So let's talk about economic viability. The auto industry has been around since Henry Ford and General Motors in 1908. It's literally grown by leaps and bounds. It serves America very well. These companies are profitable. They're moderately profitable overall. There's one newcomer in the electric side that's still lost billions of dollars, but there's still time. It's been in business 17 years and hasn't turned a profit yet, but there's still time. So, and maybe Henry Ford didn't turn a profit. Well, it didn't take him 17 years to turn a profit. But any of these services and providers have to find a way toward profitability. So far, it's eluded Uber and Lyft. The B-Cycles here in Denver, B-Cycle program, when then Governor Hickenlooper, actually when he was Mayor Hickenlooper, touted the B-Cycle program. You may know it's going out of business. Those bikes are going away. It's going to be completely revamped. All the scooters that are in downtown, there's a lot of them in downtown. Most of those are not yet profitable. Right now, and Doug's talked about it earlier, but RTD is not profitable. There's something that is profitable, and that's privately owned transportation. It's profitable, it's viable, it's long-lasting, and serves America very well. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because I know time is short, but a lot of our focus has been around Denver area. But cars are important. Let's say mobility. Mobility is important for all of Colorado. And when you get outside that corridor, let's say the Front Range corridor from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs, and get into western Colorado or eastern Colorado, they are totally dependent on their cars. And some of them, by the way, we would advocate this, but there's 3-car garages and 5-car garages and 10-car driveways. We love that, but they have to have them. And I think eventually we have to get to a different form of funding CDOT so they have the money they need to properly maintain the highways that we use. But there is a urban-rural divide on that, by the way, because rural America, rural Colorado, is a lot more dependent on those vehicle miles traveled than us that are based here in Denver. And so I think that's going to be a bridge that will have to be crossed to make that viable for rural Colorado. I want to tell you a quick story, and this will involve CDOT because they did replace the bridge. You may have read about this in some of the Denver Post media or other media. but the Highway 82 bridge that you have to take to go to the Glitter Gulch or anything down valley, or up valley, I guess there, was out for about 3 or 4 months. And the local governments, the city of Glenwood Springs and Garfield County, they incentivized trying to get people to the bus. Get out of your cars, because there's only 2 bridges. There's only 2 ways across the Colorado River there. And some people had to commute, so those commutes are kind of like Denver's, not quite as long, but can be pretty long. But what had been a 15-minute commute became a 2-hour and 15-minute commute. But people still didn't get out of their cars and ride the bus. They still stayed in their cars. So there is a dependency and a love affair with their motor vehicles. And it's not just in Denver, it's not just in Colorado, it's around the country and I think around the world. And I think public policy needs to recognize that and adapt our mobility to the way consumers prefer, because they clearly prefer motor vehicles. And by the way, statistically, here in Colorado, another factoid that you may not know. You probably do know that 5.66 million residents live here now. That's counting every man, woman, and child that lives in Colorado. Anyone care to guess, a little audience participation again, how many licensed motor vehicles are on Colorado roads?
11 million.
No? I should have said the first answer will be low. Let me give you a hint. There are more motor vehicles licensed in Colorado than what there are residents that live here. 5.95 million registered vehicles. I think they're all on I-25 whenever I need to try to go somewhere.
I love it. Okay, we're going to ask 3 questions from each of you. So let's start with Doug. What can we expect from RTD in the next 6 to 12 months?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share about this, because a lot of you have read a number of stories in the newspaper recently, and you say, boy, they must be managing things poorly. For example, operator shortage, and that ties in with dropped runs, and that ties in with the proposed temporary service reductions. So here's the reality. Over the past 2 years, we have hired roughly as many bus operators as we had. You'd think that would double the force. No, we've actually lost some. Over the past 2 years, we have hired about 2/3 of the number of rail operators, light rail and commuter rail. Let me explain the distinction. Some of you know this. The commuter rail, University of Colorado A line and the B line out to Westminster, and the soon-to-open N line that will go up to 124th and East Lake from Denver Union Station. Those are commuter rail lines. Light rail lines are a smaller vehicle. It sounds like it is, right? I mean, the commuter rail is a heavier train, and if you get on the train to the plane, you see it's much bigger, takes up more space, it has a level loading platform, you don't have to walk up steps. Commuter rail is the heavy train. Light rail is just what it sounds like, a lighter train, uses much less electricity. To go back to the electricity thing, by the way, we did at one point in time have the largest electric bus fleet in the nation. The 16th Street Mall buses are all electric buses, and we were, when we put those into service, the largest electric fleet in the nation. We're now, I think, second or third, because other areas have adopted a lot of electric vehicles. But everything that we run on rail is electric, and it uses a lot of power. The light rail uses a fraction of the power that we use for the commuter rail. But we, in terms of hiring light rail operators, have hired about 2/3 of the full complement that we had. And so you think, well, again, you must have a surplus. The problem is not hiring, the problem is retention. And the retention problem is really associated with 2 principal factors. Number 1, mandated overtime. Because we don't have enough operators to do it. When an operator signs on and becomes your bus or rail operator, that person is told you're going to work 6 days a week. Well, how long will that go on? Until we tell you it isn't. 6 days a week. 6 days a week. Month after month after month. Now, people will come on and they will join RTD and they'll say, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, and so they will leave. Second element is split shifts. As you know, we're a little busier in the morning and a little busier in the afternoon, and we're a little quiet in the middle of the day. So we tell operators you're going to have a split shift. You will work from, for example, from 5 a.m. until 9 a.m. and then from 3 p.m. until 7 p.m. And that's going to be your day. Well, what do I do in those intervening hours? Well, you can run errands, you can go home, you can take a nap, you can stop at the shops, you can relax in the work, whatever. Those are two problems, and trying to get people to accept those, that's a genuine challenge. So the operator shortage exists, and that creates then the dropped runs. Because pursuant to our collective bargaining agreement with the Amalgamated Transit Union, an operator can call up 30 minutes before the scheduled departure. And that's okay, that's allowed. That's what our contract with the union says. Now, we're working with them now to try to address that. Because obviously, if you just find out 30 minutes before, we have what we call an extra board. Operators who show up and say, well, I'm not working today, but I'm willing to take a run. And why wouldn't they? Because if you're working on the weekend and you're working on mandated overtime, we'll pay you $36 an hour. That's not bad. That's not bad. You know, that's a decent living. That's if you're new. That's if you're new. If you're more experienced, your rate goes up accordingly. But you look at that and you say, okay, it's a bit of a challenge, but the extra board is only so deep, and after a while you have to start dropping runs, and that's what we're doing. And that's why we are now proposing some temporary service reductions. So over the next 6 to 12 months, we hope that in May, because we go through a long public outreach project process and communication with people to talk about what we are going to reduce service on, we hope that we'll reach a state of equilibrium where we'll reduce enough service that we'll actually have the operators in hand who can provide that service. Then we'll be able to deliver what we promise. Then, as we start ramping up from there, we'll be able to restore service. So bear in mind, we are looking at all of that. It's a huge challenge for us. My anticipation is that in May, we actually will implement those temporary service reductions. I should clarify, some of the reductions that we are proposing will actually be permanent because there are just some runs that don't have any people. We count. We know who's on the bus. We know who's on the train at any moment in time. And we have some sophisticated technology that does a lot of that automatic passenger counting. But the point is, some of those just don't have the demand, so some runs on the bus side will go away. But we hope to restore all of the rail service and the rest of the bus service.
So you answered one of my questions, so I'm just going to ask you one more, and I want to make sure we get enough time for the other two speakers. RTE ridership is on pace to fall for the 5th year in a row. In the past year, it was about 97 million annual boardings. The year before that, it was 100 million. The year before that was 101 million, and the year before that was 103 million. What would you say is the leading cause of this trend?
Thank you very much, because the other thing I wanted to add as a footnote to the other answer, and that applies to this answer, it ain't just us. It ain't just Denver. This problem is experienced globally. New York City, St. Louis, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami, Omaha, London, all have the same problem in terms of not having enough operators and decreased ridership. Now, the decreases are not super dramatic, but they're significant, and some of it is fed by lack of reliability. If you're dropping runs, people get upset about that, and they start going back to either a single occupancy vehicle or a cycle or a pogo stick. But as we go through that, recognize it is not a Denver problem. It is in fact a global problem. And those ridership numbers in part are attributable to some of the service disruptions and in part due to the fact that Tim's been doing a hell of a job because it's cheaper to own a car now than it has been almost forever.
I love it, thank you. Shoshana, what factors does CDOT take into consideration in order to properly address Colorado's transportation needs?
We touched on the answer to this at the beginning of the presentation, but the challenge that we have is to distribute a limited amount of funding across the state in ways that kind of balance equitability in different manners. And the answer you get if you go by lane miles is different than the answer you get if you go by population density, and there's sort of reasons why we have to accommodate parts of the road system that are heavily reliant on both. So in dedicating our resources, one of the key factors that we've done in our process, but as part of the kind of mission that we have to serve the whole state of Colorado, is to think about how we balance across the regions and kind of make sure that set-asides for rural Colorado really go towards rural roads. And I'll give just one example of this in the interest of time, which is that when the legislature passed Senate Bill 267, which was the funding package that most recently provided us with increased resources for the next few years, it included a 25% rural set-aside. That left us with a policy decision about what does that 25% rural set-aside mean. So we were working together with the Transportation Commission through the deliberations that we've gone through over the past 6 months or so. The decision that we came to was that rural in this context meant non-interstate. Which is significant because dedicating 25% of the resources to a rural interstate could mean that one portion of I-70 could absorb the whole amount. And we felt that that set-aside was put in there for a reason, which was to take care of some of the less dense but highly important roads across the state, places where there may not be an alternative roadway, so that if one goes down, the only detour is 2 hours away. And to make sure that we're touching some of these places where, in parts, they haven't been seriously treated since the 1970s. Just today I was talking with my team about a road where we're about to break ground, and it's about 44 miles, hasn't received a real surface treatment since the 1970s. So that gives you a sense of the vastness of our system, but also the intricacy with which we have to balance resources across areas that look very different.
That's good. How is CDOT planning to accommodate Colorado's population growth while maintaining our current roads? Nice, easy question.
I'll have that one solved by tomorrow. The answer, just to tease it, is definitely pogo stick lands. I don't know what a pogo stick is. The challenge that we have is to take care of the system that we have while planning for the future. And if you err too much in either direction, you can sort of shortchange the other. And, one of the other policy decisions that we had to make with respect to the allocation of our current resources was how much to spend on what's called asset management. Basically, road repaving and taking care of what we've got. It is not the thing that always receives the sort of first and foremost attention because it doesn't get you anything new and shiny. It gets you something that's not broken when it is broken now. We again, through this process with the public and the commission, came to a decision that about half of those dollars that we have to allocate would go towards projects with a significant state of good repair component. And that's a significant statement of values in the way that we spend our dollars, and stressing that we need to, first and foremost, take care of the foundation upon which everything else is built. Because if what we have is not taken care of, augmenting it just mounts a problem where you have operations and maintenance that spiral and you can't take care of them. That being said, we have congestion areas like I-25 where we just have to do something about it. But taking little pieces of everything wouldn't solve that problem. Hence what I mentioned before, which was that we really felt the need to prioritize along the corridors where it would make the most difference. And almost 40% of these resources in our plan are for some portion of I-25. But you know what? 80+% of the people who live in Colorado live along the I-25 corridor. So if we are going to sort of double down on capacity in one place, the numbers sort of speak for themselves in terms of it being a logical place to do it. So, I think all of this gets to the point of having to stretch limited dollars in ways where they optimize their performance. And, there is no way to solve all of these problems at once, but thinking about how we do it incrementally is something we have to be very strategic about.
That's great. You two answered one of the questions I had, so we'll just limit it to two. Tim, moving to you. What do you see in the near future for automakers, and will autonomous cars be a big part of it?
Perfect question. Thank you.
He's ready.
He always gets the best questions. The first one, and I'm glad I saved this. I meant to get it out there earlier, and I should have. The quality. We talked about safety. We've talked about emissions, how much better they are. The overall quality of the new car product gets better year in and year out. It's not like we wake up in the morning and we think, oh my God, the car in my driveway is so much better than the car I had in my driveway 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It is, and statistically it is. And let me hit on those statistics. Just 20 years ago, the average age of the fleet, this is all the vehicles on the road in the US at the time, 20 years ago, this was, let's say, at the year 2000, the average age of the fleet was 8.4 years. The average age of the fleet today is grown by 50%. It's 12.9 years. Here in Colorado, it even beats that. It's 13.7 years. So I'm often asked, why do people keep their cars so long? And that is a three-word answer. A little audience participation. It's the most basic answer.
They don't break.
They don't break. I was going to say it in a different way, but because they can. Because they can keep them longer. Okay, the culture used to be, when I was growing up, by the way, I was lucky enough, I had a brand new car when I turned 16. But at that time, you could buy a new car for, I'm going to date myself here, but at that time, you could buy a new car for $2,000. And I was, I had a brand new car to drive to my junior class every day. It was pretty cool. My parents did help me with it. But at that time, you didn't expect to keep a car more than 2 or 3 years. The culture was to keep a car 2 or 3 years or drive it 30 or 40,000 miles. And oh, by the way, at that time, the culture was that if you had a car with 100,000 miles, it was deemed worn out. It was very little value to trade into a dealer or to give to a friend or relative. You want to give me that? Why do you want to give me that kind of trouble, right? Nobody wanted to take your car. Now, because of the quality improvements, a car with 100,000 miles on it is barely broke in. And this, it's because of competition that the cars have gotten better and better year in and year out. And so now they keep them longer because they can. I tell our dealers, you sell the next car, your next new car, you're selling it for life. Not necessarily the car's life, but the consumer's life. Because they're not going to trade it in. They'll gift it to a friend or relative, or they'll gift it to a student getting their license for the first time, or to an aging parent who doesn't need it, because of the longevity. So it's now, and this is across the board, it transcends brands, manufacturers, nations of origin, it's across the board. And your next new car, you can expect, if you want to keep it 300,000 miles, you can. Because they're that good. Now on autonomy. The other thing about new cars, if you haven't noticed this, I think you probably have, new cars get more autonomous every year in and year out. Now and they're leading, and they're contributing to traffic safety. Lane departure warnings, crash avoidance warnings. We have cars now that will park themselves. You can, with an app, you can park your car, parallel park it, or bring it out of a parallel parking spot. Or you can say, find a parking spot, and the car will find a parking spot and then park itself in it. So we're getting closer and closer to full autonomy. But the predictions on full autonomy are all over the place, and they have been reined in some. Okay? Anybody in the room, I know a lot of you know Red Bridges. Red Bridges wrote the book, The Driverless Car Revolution. He wrote it, it came out in October 2015. I read that and I thought, well, first off, how does Red Bridges know anything about the auto industry? I read that and I thought, wow, I really couldn't believe a lot of it. I went to a public forum that he hosted and asked him a lot of tough questions. And I said, I think this autonomy thing is actually, he was saying at the time, originally, he thought it would eliminate traffic congestion, no more rush hour traffic. And I had to scratch my head and I said, Rhett, I think it does just the opposite. Because my car never drives itself, it never goes anywhere without me. But what if it did? It would be putting on it would be adding vehicle miles traveled without passengers. So when you think, fast forward to when we have full autonomy, the Uber and Lyft that you take may not have a driver, but it's going to drop somebody else off over there and then pick you up over here. All those empty miles, you could call them REO, run empty only, run empty miles will be new vehicle miles traveled. They'll add on. And now cars get, because of the efficiency, will be able to drive very inexpensive. And Doug talked about new cars are less expensive to operate. They will continue to get less and less, and more efficient, less and less expensive. So without parking spots in downtown Denver, City of Denver allowed the new Marriott AC and Le Meridian Hotel 500 rooms, 0 parking spots. Think about it, 0 parking spots. So there's a shortage of parking. It's intentional, they don't want people to park. But if your car can't park itself and it's fully autonomous, what's it going to do? It's going to make the street its parking spot. So that's the problem with that's a problem, a challenge ahead with full autonomy. Let me talk about there's 5 levels of autonomy. I won't try to educate you on all of them. But level 5 would be full autonomy, no driver needed, and frankly, no driver allowed. So no gas pedal, no brake pedal, and no steering wheel. John Krafchek, a guy that used to be with Ford Engineering and then later was Hyundai of North America, is president of Hyundai of North America, now runs the Waymo unit of Google. Google is probably further ahead on autonomy, in my opinion, and John Krafchek's a good friend of mine, so I may be biased, but they're far ahead of everybody else on full autonomy. But John Krafchek has been quoted as saying, we may never get to level 5 autonomy. And this is the guy that runs Waymo. He's charged with getting autonomous cars on the road and doing a pretty good job of it. But he says we may never get to level 5, right? We may never need to get to level 5, frankly, for that matter, but we may never get to level 5. So with autonomous cars, just a few factoids. They will be very convenient. You may not have to have a garage, but because you can program your car to go park itself on a parking spot in a street that's not already taken. It can just go park itself, or park itself in a parking structure that may have vacant spots. So you may not have to have your garage, but it will add to the vehicle miles traveled, and it will create more congestion. I haven't found any way around it. Shoshana hit on it a little bit. If there can be less single occupancy vehicles and more people in each one, then maybe that helps offset it, but it's going to contribute to the more vehicle miles traveled versus less. And so that's going to be a challenge. And what the other thing that I think Rutt had at that time, and he's evolved, and I'm not being critical. Rutt's a good friend of mine, and that's a problem with predicting the future. It never always works out the way you originally anticipate. But when he originally wrote the book, he said, yeah, you won't have to have these serviced in Denver. You just say go up to Dacona, and they'll all be electric. So you put your car, take it up to Dacona and have the batteries charged and all that, and then bring it back. Well, in rush hour traffic, that's, light traffic, it's only a 30-minute drive to Dacona. In rush hour traffic, that may take an hour and a half. Now round trip it, that's 3 hours. Now if they're electric vehicles, you've used up the whole charge just taking it to Dacona and back. So I think we will have to have service centers for full autonomy, parking structures that are dedicated for the cars to get them a place that they don't have to take their parking spot out of the middle of the lane. So a lot of challenges ahead with full autonomy. It's exciting stuff, but it will create a whole new set of challenges. Can I get an amen?
Hell yeah.
Amen.
Okay, we never got to Q&A with the group, but I gotta be respectful of everybody's time. I promised 7 o'clock. 20 seconds or less. I'm gonna hand the microphone to each of you. If you were king or queen for a day, could make any change that you would want to make the largest positive impact with transportation, roads, people's lives, etc., what would that be? So Doug, we'll start with you, and I need to hold you each to 20 seconds, which will be 1 minute, and we're gonna get out of here. Doug?
Assuming there is no one from Boulder or Longmont here, I would build the Northwest Rail Line at least so they would stop nagging me about it.
I'd hit the electric vehicle target just to make Tim's day.
There you go.
And I'd love to help you hit it, but I think we need a more realistic target. And for me, I would say we need to add more lanes, and we need to keep the car lanes for car lanes, keep the bike trails for bikes and not try to mix the two because it's really not productive, safe, or worthwhile.
I want to thank our panelists again. Let's give a round of applause. And thank you to Tim and the Colorado Water Association for hosting us. Feel free to come up and ask them questions. I need to run and catch a plane, but thank you all for being here.